cups of coffee and cups of tea there. But welcome to this webinar, hosted by Elephants Don't Forget and supported by Hogan Lovells as well. Great, we've got lots of people on this webinar, over 300, I believe, who registered for this webinar. And given the enforced work from home conditions that we're now experiencing, maybe we'll get an uptick in people interested in this subject at the last minute there. To tickle your fancies here, what we've done is that we would love to get your ideas and suggestions for our poll questions as well as our chat functions, so you can participate and pose a question to our panelists, Frank Brown and Adrian Harvey, by dropping in a question denoted by the two speech bubbles at the top of your screen. And you can tick the anonymous button if you don't want your details to be shared with anybody else on this webinar. Alternatively, you can pose a comment through the chat function, which is denoted by the single speech bubble, again at the top or bottom of your screen there. We thought we'd kick this webinar off with a poll question. And just before we kickstart everything, you'll see on your screen just one question there. How much have your governance practices and controls changed over the last 2 years due to large-scale remote working? So how much have your governance practices and controls changed over the last 2 years due to large-scale remote working there? Again, when you're posting your answers to us, they are anonymous and that they will not be shared with anybody else apart from yourself, which will share the results of this webinar for. So, yeah, still getting some people joining there. Let's see if we can, let's relaunch. Okay, so how much have your governance practices and controls changed over the last 2 years due to large-scale remote working? Welcome to those people who have just signed in. We're just asking a starter for 10, which is our first question, a poll question. Quite interesting to get the insights of Adrian and Frank in a minute, if you can participate in responding to the answers. I'll put those up on the screen in the next 20 or so seconds there. And again, we're not sharing these, your explicit answers with anybody else. We're not going to name and shame anybody on this webinar there. We just want to get an indication of what the trajectory and what you've seen in your own organization or organizations that you're working with or for in the sector there. Thank you very much for your answers here. Interesting response there. Frank, Adrian, welcome to the webinar. I'll do the introductions in a minute, but quite interesting that we've got 5% completely changed, 2% they haven't changed at all, bulk are in the middle.
Pretty much what we anticipated before we started the webinar. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I am surprised that somebody, well, fair play for being honest, they haven't changed at all.
I mean, I think there's always going to be a variance depending on the sector that firms are in and what they do. I would suspect, probably in the nicest possible way, there may be more change that people may wish to do if they sort of looked into the business and looked into the requirements. I mean, obviously, we'll explore that during the conversation.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that. And yeah, we'll certainly kickstart this webinar fully and properly. And so welcome to this webinar, Elephants Don't Forget webinar, where we bring you right up to date with all you need to know about everything that matters in financial services there. So whether you're waiting for a bus or waiting in hope for a train that might never appear today, welcome to this webinar where we're discussing today controlling your risk and regulatory obligations with a hybrid workforce. Is that even possible? And certainly delighted to welcome Frank Brown, back by popular demand, to this webinar indeed and there. So lots have changed over the last 2 years, but over the next 50 minutes or so, we want to discuss with Adrian and Frank the practical steps that firms can take to improve manage and respond to the challenges and also the opportunities that may arise from hybrid working as well there. And if you would participate in the polls, that'd be fantastic. We always value your feedback and opinions on these key issues that we are discussing today. Those are the headline figures and the headline topics that we'll be covering off. But what we want to do is get to the nub of it and actually look at and have a deep dive understanding of what the FCA is expecting of regulated firms and who do these regulations apply to, and importantly, what should your firm be doing in the first place. A PDF version of the slides will be sent out to you straight after the webinar, alongside a recording within 48 hours. And if you want to, you can pose your questions, as we said, in the chat function or using the Q&A function, where you can post those anonymously to our panelists. You can also subscribe and update subscribe to our regulatory updates and our thought leadership from both Hogan's as well as ourselves there. So let's kickstart this webinar off with you, Frank. Obviously, prior to the 2021 October announcement, there we had this message from Julia Hoggart, Director of Market Oversight, and that was just it wasn't a warning, but a nudge across the bows of regulated firms in 2020. They're asking us to do certain things there. Did you see the mood music change as early as 2020, or were there signs before that?
I mean, certainly initially there was that realistic acknowledgement that we are in a, business continuity crisis situation here. People left their offices very quickly. I mean, I remember it myself in was it about March 2020, leaving the office, that we all expected we'd be back in a couple of weeks or something. Never happened. So the regulator was recognised that situation from the start. As we got towards the October time, and it was clear that we weren't going back anytime soon, there was that recognition that as we move into BAU, there needs to be that enhancement of control, and the feeling from the regulator that firms had a reasonable amount of time to get things up to speed. And I think the key word in this one, and I think the key challenge for firms, and this remains now absolutely, is the concept of equivalent. So this idea that hybrid office, the expectation it should be equivalent, and that is a incredibly loaded word in that sentence. And if you think about it from a firm side, from a regulated side, from an senior manager's side, asking yourself how you would like to answer that question, how you would like to demonstrate that yes, the controls are equivalent, the risks are equivalent, our systems and processes are equivalent on both sides. Not easy to answer, and equally not easy to do and achieve as well.
So Frank, it's a good word, isn't it? Because it doesn't mean the same. Yeah. So for me, it's about standards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll come on to this. And so it doesn't mean that because you did X in the office environment, you need to do X in the working from home environment. It just means that the standard that you deployed pre-COVID in a working from home environment needs to be of equal standard.
Yeah, in terms of controlling the risks. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you may achieve the objectives in a different manner. You don't have to have exactly the same processes in place. I mean, it's not really practical, but what you need to be doing, and this webinar's title is sort of in terms of risk, is recognizing what those risks are, understanding those risks and how they shift between the office and the hybrid environment, and putting those effective controls, equivalent controls in place.
Well, right on cue, you talk about effective. So let's ask the audience how effective their controls are in that. So we posed the question that you'll see on the screen: how effective are your firm's existing hybrid working practices, processes and controls in the following areas? So you'll be able to answer them on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 to 4, I should say, not effective right through to moderately effective there. So the question is, how effective are your hybrid firms' controls in a hybrid working environment there? And there we've listed 5 key areas: conduct risk, cyber resilience, data protection, staff training, and customers there. And again, the results of this poll will be published to you as an infographic afterwards there. But obviously, without skewing the data and skewing the information, we're talking about evidence in this webinar, Frank. It's fair to say that the FCA was rather complimentary about firms responding and reacting to initially COVID issues and working from home, and the pat on the back to all firms who have responded in that manner, don't you think?
Absolutely, without question. I mean, I was working with a range of firms at the time. I was actually seconded in to a firm just before lockdown who were part of the infrastructure of financial services, so quite a significant organisation. And it was very clear with them and also with many other firms that the business continuity worked, which is very impressive because yes, we do testing of business continuity, but we haven't actually done a full live demonstration of it. So business continuity worked, and I think it was enormously beneficial to see it across the industry that things did not fall over, systems worked, customers still got the service they were expecting, and there wasn't particular outages and particular concerns. So I think it was reasonable and appropriate for the regulator to say yes, things had gone well.
When you look at the poll results there, Adrian, what stands out to you? We've got staff training there, very effective there, and moderately effective staff training there, but also slight concern about conduct risk, slightly effective.
Yeah, I remember we were talking before we kick this off about, my sense from talking to lots of people every week is that I'm seeing a two-tier standard emerging, not necessarily deliberately, but more as a result perhaps of this point about equivalence. It's actually quite difficult. We can't do the same as we did in the office. We have to do something different. And is that different really as good as it was? So my sense is we're seeing a two-tier standard event occurring and becoming the norm. And I would suggest that is not in line with what the regulator expects. And I can completely understand why firms might get themselves in that position. It's just too difficult. How are we going to do this in a home environment? And I think Helen raised the point about what do we mean by customer? For example, it could mean like data privacy. So if you look at your data privacy in an office environment, and then you look at that data privacy in a shared flat environment, what are you doing to protect against that, for example? So I'm definitely seeing a two-tier. I hear it a lot. And I think part of what we're going to talk about today is, to what extent is that real? And what can you do about mitigating those risks?
I think also, to your two-tier comment, recognizing that there may be some risks that can't be adequately controlled within the hybrid environment, or it's not economically effective or outside your risk appetite to control them. So I don't think everybody can work from a hybrid environment. And I don't think everybody can work from a hybrid environment sort of most of the time as well. So firms need to go back and think about what's the potential risk, what controls, are those controls adequate? For some people, some functions within the organization, no, we just can't do it.
But from the poll results here, we've got obviously people more thinking that they've got effective controls around cyber resilience, as opposed to perhaps those that are lacking in, say, data protection. Comes in there. Is that the challenge? We'll talk about that and the issue of data sharing and possibilities of risks around that later. But one to park that, quite interesting that firms do prioritize and think that, okay, they may have addressed cyber resilience, but still conduct risk as well as data protection are somewhat need improving in that respect.
I think cybersecurity or cyber resilience is a relatively easy box to tick, in so much as a lot of it's infrastructure based, it's technology based. So I'm working from home, I'm working in the office, I'm working on my phone. I'm sort of doing that to some extent before. So I think it's a relatively easy bar to cross. Yeah, I think in some other areas like conduct, customers, staff training, I think, and data protection, if you put privacy in brackets after that, I think these are far more challenging to reach the same standards or equivalent standards in a work from home environment?
Yeah, I think on the cyber side, we get familiar and comfortable, though. I mean, you think at the start of the lockdown, there was a lot of sort of Zooms getting hijacked and people sort of joining calls they shouldn't join, and some controls were put in place. Those controls to an extent have lapsed to a degree, and in other areas of the sort of data security, cyber security, people get comfortable with the new normal, and bad actors are, that is where they enter organizations. That's where they thrive, with people's comfort and complacency.
Mm. So the rubber hit the road, Frank, in October 21 of, when the FCA stated that their expectation, listed their expectations of what they thought that firms should be doing and believe that firms should be doing. Prior to that, they were content, but this was a marker which they laid down for firms to rise to. How do they respond to these expectations? And do you want to just pick out a few key elements of those expectations?
I mean, you have a high level expectation around the concept of sort of have a plan in place before you actually continue BAU with a hybrid environment. They're not particularly specific about what that plan should look like, but in general, there would be an expectation that that would include a fairly comprehensive view of what the potential concerns could be, how they're going to be addressed, what controls need to be in place across the points on the previous slide around your sort of cyber, your data, your conduct, etc., and also things like market integrity. And being able to demonstrate that, yes, we have thought about all the potential eventualities and these other controls, and this is the monitoring we will put in place to make sure things are happening properly. And inevitably, whenever the regulator says you should have a plan in place, there should be an expectation that they may ask for that plan and review that plan, both during the kind of run-of-the-mill supervisory activity, but especially if something goes wrong. So if there is an incident, then there will be absolutely a consideration of whether the hybrid working practices contributed to that incident. And if so, why didn't you think about it? If you're talking about senior managers, what reasonable steps were you taking to make sure this was controlled?
Philip, one of the, thinking about a risk register in the old days, pre-COVID, you would be able to quantify a lot of the risks. If you think about risks arising from your employee base, that's always been gnarly difficult. It's quite hard to quantify that in a meaningful and non-emotional way, or historically has been. Once you then take that employee out of the structured environment of the office, how has your risk register changed? How have you, have those risks themselves changed as a result of that? In particular, the people-based risks. How are you quantifying them? How are you evidencing that they aren't a risk, or it's a risk that you're able to manage? It's a particularly, it's come up again and again on webinars that we've run, Philip, is this about, and certainly the recent conduct rules looking at evidencing. How are firms going to evidence this? And I suspect that this is a really difficult area for firms. I would expect a lot of people on this webinar to be looking at that saying it's perhaps not something we do particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, we had it recently with the new operational resilience regulations, which cuts across aspects of this, where firms had to produce a plan in a similar manner. And there was an awful lot of challenge from the regulator around show your workings, show your justification, show the governance, show the fact that senior management have taken an informed decision about this and can evidence that. So, and back to your point there, Adrian, about the risk side of things, it's not always the case that firms have adjusted the risk register, gone back through the risk control self-assessment activity, key risk indicators to encompass, I mean, I know it's a cliche, but the sort of new normal working environment.
The expectations of the regulator around conduct and culture haven't changed, obviously, between pre-COVID and after COVID, Frank. But what have you seen? What's the impact of hybrid working on conduct and culture? And are they meeting, our firms, like Adrian said, are they meeting the challenge?
I mean, culture has always been a difficult one for organisations. I mean, it's something the regulator has periodically talked about in terms of the need for an effective culture of organisations. It is something that most firms, even prior to lockdown, had not spent perhaps as much time as they should have done on it. I mean, I always talk about, and we've done these things before, I always talk about culture in a slightly Orwellian way, in the sense that it is a lever of control. It is a force multiplier for your control functions if you get it right, and that's, you know, making the intangible tangible, that clarity of these are the risks that we need to control against. We will use culture as a lever of that control. As if you think about it, culture is what happens when senior management, compliance are not in the room in an organization. And now there's an awful lot of rooms that senior management and compliance aren't in. So culture becomes that sort of glue for the consistency and and keeping the organization on the straight and narrow, or the individuals on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. And Adrian, in working with clients in a hybrid working environment, it does appear that obviously, as Frank said, that organizations who are more customer centric and perhaps more staff centric have had it, well, not easier, but simpler to migrate or pivot their businesses and their cultures accordingly. But other firms have struggled in that respect to actually balance that culture or actually meet that cultural expectation in a hybrid working environment. Is that what you've seen?
Well, early days, I made myself unpopular on LinkedIn by publishing an article looking at individual human behavior when moved out of a pack, because we are pack animals, whether you like it or not. You know, we perform, generally speaking, better as a pack. When you remove people from a pack, their behavior changes. And one of the key behavioral traits is their attitude to risk changes. So before people, if I will, with the slides, circulate some material that supports this. This is not my view, it's a scientific, well-researched thing. So people's attitude to risk changes when they're not in the pack environment, i.e. working with your colleagues in the office. And typically this manifests in cutting corners and doing things that perhaps you wouldn't do in the office environment. Generally speaking, not good things. So what as an organization, let's assume that is true and that I can substantiate that. What's the organization doing to address that absolute risk? So when the employee's in a home environment, their behavior changes. So this now comes down to governance and management, or leadership, yeah, subset of leadership, and how are you managing and governing, yeah, those, and how are you supervising those individuals? What are you doing to mitigate that particular risk? And I think that's about competence. We talked about first line of support earlier, yeah, and I know we're coming back to that, Philip, but I think that comes down to what extent is it really critically important our people are competent in role, and that we can substantiate that, as opposed to having a, dare I say, a piece of paper I can wave to say, well, we train them, so they should be. That's a really big difference. And I think it makes a big difference from a risk mitigation and quantification point of view.
Let me throw this out to you then. Is the fear of being spotted potentially because you're in a firm, in a head office, a great way of actually raising the bar of compliance and risk? What I mean by that is, obviously, if you're not in that environment where you can't be spotted, won't be spotted, then there's an exposure to greater risk. I'm
not sure that sounds really negative towards employees, and in as much as all employees are sitting there waiting for the cats away to do wrong things. No, I don't think so. I think it's a much more deeper emotional level, that once you are part of a team, you are part of a collective, a herd, or whatever word you want to use there, yeah, and you have a duty, you have a feeling of responsibility to your peers and colleagues. And that in itself is a self-policing factor. Once you take away the colleagues, that's when your behaviours tend to shift.
Yeah, it can do. I mean, I think it's incredibly important as part of the cultural messages and as part of the control to sufficiently explain the why to staff. I mean, firms take an awful lot of time with the what, you must comply with this bit of regulation, but unpacking that to the, why are we doing this? What is the reasons, either for, our own benefits, obviously, but equally for the customer's benefits and from counterparties' benefits, making it real to people, the reason why this is done, rather than just having these are our rules, this is what we do. Makes it much more likely that you will instill those cultural values and they will actually maintain the performance, even if they're not getting overseen on a day-to-day basis.
Frank, you talked before the webinar about the importance of monitoring, and we talked about and then we went on to evidence there. What are you seeing? How are you seeing firms responding to that monitoring? Because there's data privacy issues around that as well, and employment law issues around that. Have firms sought that balance and got that balance right, or are they still tentatively taking baby steps in that area to explore what's acceptable to staff's well-being, and also acceptable, going back to also your why as well as your what there?
Yeah, I mean, there are specific requirements in CISC, for example, around call recording of particular activities, which there is now a clear expectation of, and there has been for some time a clear expectation that regardless of where the activity is happening, that will happen. So, I mean, that is de facto a form of monitoring, certainly. There's been some interesting work around AI and analytics in terms of seeing what people are doing. I mean, it's a contentious area in terms of the extent to which you are sort of actively overseeing your staff, and what that sort of leads to in terms of attitudinal shifts. But there are smart ways of monitoring people and reasonable ways of monitoring people and understanding and using the sort of behavioral differences or activity differences between how long or how much it takes for somebody to do something when they're sitting in the office in comparison to how long and how many interactions it takes them to do it at home. If there's a marked difference between those two, then it's not unreasonable to consider whether it's been done properly in both locations.
Can I raise this point about surveillance?
Yeah.
Because just putting it out there, pre-COVID, we worked in an office environment, and there's a certain inherent level of surveillance that occurs. Some of it's latent, clocking in and clocking out and things like that. Yeah, but there is an inherent level of surveillance that occurs in the office of every employee. When the employee goes to work from home and somebody has the conversation about surveillance in the working from home environment, what I see is by far the absolute vast majority of people are like, no way. Not acceptable. I'm not going to. And I think it was one of the big outsourcers, their French CEO said they're going to put a webcam on every laptop for every employee all around the world, 350,000 people on being filmed while they're at work. It seems like it's so unpopular and so unacceptable that it just won't occur. You won't have that level of intrusive surveillance that is non-intrusive in a work environment, but at the same level.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, the outcomes or the effect is exactly the same as having your webcam on or having your manager sort of wandering behind you in the office. But our emotional feeling to it is absolutely different, and I don't think you can necessarily get beyond that emotional feeling and that emotional challenge. So that I go back to my sort of concept of the sort of, the smarter ways of doing things, the output monitoring, the time it takes, the interactions monitoring, as opposed to your webcam must be on 7.5 hours of the day.
That's another webinar itself. I want you to park that surveillance and monitoring. I'm conscious that we've also got a number of questions that have come in, a number of comments that come in. Neil, we'll come back to your question, and it's a really good question around that conduct and conduct rules as well. Frank, I just want to lean to, it would be remiss of us if we didn't actually raise consumer duty, the issue and the impact of hybrid working potentially on the customer journey. That's going to come front and center to many firms dialed into this webinar. What are your thoughts on that? And what are the risks that firms need to look at through the lens of consumer duty, which perhaps, they're just looking at the regulation and looking at adherence, but when you overlap the risk of hybrid working, that might throw out some unintended consequences.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and firms are starting to grapple with consumer duty at the moment, and it's quite a long journey. But you, like you say, you add in the hybrid working mix. One of the big ones is the cross-cutting rule around foreseeable harm. And it goes back to the sort of, do you have a plan for hybrid working? Is your plan effective? So if things go wrong, then there will be that challenge around, you should have known that this was going to happen. You should have seen this was a problem. Why did you not show me the evidence of how you got to this decision that this was reasonable? So the foreseeable harm one will be the most trickiest, the trickiest one with firms. I mean, you've got the sort of customer support outcome as well, in terms of, are you delivering adequate support to the customers? Are you enabling them to meet their financial objectives in terms of the advice and guidance you're giving them, if it's an advice and guidance product? But to my mind, it will be foreseeable harm, which will sort of, impact most with the hybrid side of things. And because it is a principle, it's not, COBS 10.1a. It is much more broad ranging and much more open to interpretation by the regulator, and much harder for firms to, counteract or challenge.
And as Adrian's said, that the buck really stops with senior managers, always has done, obviously under SMCR, whether you're solo or dual regulated firms on this webinar as well. And their clear oversight and governance structures, do you see that in place, Frank, within the hybrid working environment? Or do you see there's gaps appearing, and are those gaps closing or widening?
And unfortunately, in some organizations, they are widening. I mean, there was the kind of transition of early lockdown where, business continuity, let's just make sure the wheels don't come off, to mid-lockdown. There was a reasonable amount of oversight going on. As we get into a more BAU, more this is just the way we do things, then there has been a degree of lessening of that control with some organizations. And you've obviously got your senior management functions who are ultimately on the hook, but you've got your middle management of organizations as well. And I think they've been asked quite a lot of questions in terms of their effectiveness, in terms of their abilities to, again, it's a little cliche, the sort of, be coaches to their staff, demonstrate that they are motivating, directing, instilling the culture with them. And in many instances, I think that there needs to be some more work done in that layer of management.
Comes back to my point, Philip, about evidencing. So there's 2 points here. One is 3 lines of defence, and the evidencing of genuine competence. So in a work from home environment, the reliance on the first line of defence is increased. So perhaps if you are in a all office based environment, you could take a less robust approach to the actual competence of your frontline staff than when you are in a hybrid or working from home environment, because the rubber hits the road at that point in time with perhaps little or no oversight. Okay, the call's being recorded, but if that's your only control mechanism around that call, I think you're exposed. I think that your first line of defense will be exposed. And I think a lot of firms on this call are perhaps coming from a position where compliance or training, it's an annual event. Tick the box and we'll tick box, whatever you want to call it. And we'll get on with our work without really appreciating or quantifying what is the actual level of competence in respect to this subject matter, cybersecurity, of that particular employee who's now working largely unsupervised from home. Most firms couldn't answer that. That to me is a mile wide.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just follow on from that before we move on to this one. A stress like this, and it is a stress or a change, exposes deficiencies, and definitely exposes deficiencies in 3 lines of defence. So if your first line are not 100% bought into the fact that they are the risk owners and the risk controllers, and it is their responsibility to deliver within the organisation, that will immediately start those fractures in a hybrid environment. I mean, ideal world, it's slightly sort of, aspirational, but you shouldn't necessarily need a second line if your first line were fully on board and knew what they were doing. Your second line is more periodic reviews rather than the active reviews, but getting your, it does expose those deficiencies in the 3 lines of defence.
We had the headline, the shocker, the wow factor, the front page. Knock, knock. It's not a poor attempt at a joke on this webinar, by the way, but it's the opportunity to say, well, is the regulator come to visit you? Before the webinar, Frank, Adrian and myself discussed this, and opinions were opinionated, put it that way, on whether that was a reality or a myth. What are your thoughts, both of you, whether this is going to happen? Has this happened? Will this happen?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
This is, I got to be careful. I get quite carried away, don't I? What a load of... Anyway, it's just not going to happen, right? Forget it. It's not going to happen. The FCA is not going to knock on the door of your employees. Yeah, they've just got far too much on their plate, it would appear in the press at this point in time. Yeah, so for me, this is it's one of those things. It's out there. It's a scare tactic. It's not reality. It's not in actually an adequate control in itself.
Frank, are we going to see people making cups of tea just before to the regulators or the supervisors that knocking on the door just before the school run? Is that going to happen?
I think it is unlikely for Joe and Jenny in the call centre. Certainly, I think it's fairly unlikely the regulator will knock on their door. But if you do have SMFs, certified individuals, say material risk takers, people involved in client dealing, it is a different story. And I think it's not unreasonable to suspect or consider that it may happen. And the important thing around this is there are things you can do to reduce the risk of this, to mitigate the risk. And we were chatting about this before the conversation. I mean, I would be surprised if many firms had looked at their employment contracts and adjusted their employment contracts, and that is a relatively simple thing to do. We had another question about monitoring around, is that lawful? And there's questions around that, but having a contractual basis with your employee that this is our expectation and this is the rights we want is an incredibly beneficial thing to do.
Yes, this point about contracts is very easily done, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
For me, it's the test of... I look at some of this legislation, I say, okay, I get where you're going, FCA, but there has to be a reasonableness test, right? We've got a business to run, so what's reasonable to expect me to have done? Well, we've done nothing, or we're just hoping it doesn't happen, is a really, really bad response. On the other hand, if you say, well, look, we've looked at our employment contracts with our employees and we've explicitly made this point that the FCA does have this right. Are you aware of it? Yeah. And now we're saying, if you wish to work here, you are signing up to the fact that that's acceptable to you. And within that, then perhaps some additional governance. When you are working from home, yeah, we expect the following things. So at least then when you have the FCA conversation, you say, well, we've taken direct action. This is what we've done. We've recognised that there is a difference, that there is a material difference when an employee is working from home. And Frank, to your point, depending on the role, the job function, in some instances, I'm with you. I think there are some roles that simply can't work from home just by virtue of the level of risk that presents. But for the vast majority, rank and file, I think the starting point would be, to Ivo's point, the employment contract. Get that sorted out. I wonder how many people on this call have changed employment contracts, because it's such an easy thing to do.
Yeah, very few. And it absolutely can happen. I mean, it already does happen. You think about the dawn raids that happen, say, in the competition space or in other areas. We've seen some quite intrusive action by regulators in Europe around ESG at the moment, entering premises, seeking information from firms. So the potential risk in certain sectors and activities is absolutely there.
We talked about, and I just want panelists to pick out one or two issues here. We want to make this as practical as possible, and we're looking at the issues now about what to flag and what to take back to your organisations to look at more closely, especially when you're talking about governance practices and controls here. I want to pick up on proximity bias. It's something that people may not be familiar with it, but the fact that there might be an inequality between remote workers and also those people that are present in the office, and that might create a two-tier culture within firms there unknowingly. So the benefits of hybrid working also have some challenges there. Adrian, you talked earlier about ethical cues and nudging and that behavioural impact from being with peers or not being with peers. Are there anything else that you would flag up to organisations that they should be knowing or recognising about potential issues, potential challenges within a hybrid working environment?
I think in the early days, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about the importance of peer learning or peer support, in so much as even if I'm a tenured employee and we're working in the office, Philip, I could turn to you for help. Well, probably more likely to turn to Frank for help and ask for help and assistance with something that I don't know. In a work from home environment, okay, and people say, well, they've got Teams, they've got Teams chat, and we can do it in the feed. Yeah, and it takes a lot more time. You rely on your colleagues. It's not as instant. So I would flag the removal of, call it peer-to-peer support, yeah, just peer support, as being a material challenge for organisations. What I see this does is raise the bar in L&D. This is not about lowest cost to deliver some workplace training to tick a box. I will be blunt, more for you if that's your strategy now, yeah, because the rubber hits the road in an unsupervised way when that employee picks up the phone and has a conversation with one of your customers. And what is going to stand out in terms of what's a positive customer interaction versus one that might get you in trouble is the actual competence of your employee. And if you are basing that competence assessment on a single point in time training session, we know we've got a data point, right? On average, employees know 54% of what you need them to know. Yeah. So that's far too big a margin of error for me. And in a regulated environment, I suspect it's too big a margin of error for the regulator.
Without
regulators, sorry, Frank, the regulators talking about what Adrian's saying is this in and out crowd there. I mean, that's a real concern. Whether, whatever, you can't paint that in a positive light, can you?
It's certainly challenging. I mean, one thing we haven't mentioned, and I think is unspoken and not necessarily mentioned in firms, where's HR in this discussion? We talk about training, we talk about instilling culture within organizations. It is a lot of that is on the HR side, and there's been a lot of instances where HR have not risen to the challenge within organizations during lockdown, and also as we transition into hybrid, and they're still using old models, old assumptions. A while ago I wrote a paper of HR as the fourth line of defense, and they have an enormous responsibility, and they can be an incredibly beneficial lever if they are working effectively for things like this, balancing between in-crowd and out-crowd, getting people up to the same level.
I think that the challenge, if you like, the real challenge is the recognition that it's different. Yeah? Rather than, oh yeah, well, they're working from home, so it's a bit, I think it's really different.
Yeah.
Right? It's really different in terms of mental health, wellness, belonging, standards, supervision. Is hugely different. So I do think everyone on this call should be looking at that the periods of time when the employees are working from home. This is really different. Has our firm adopted this stance that it's really different, or have we simply said, well, they're doing the same work and they're just doing it in their front room?
Firms were honest enough, Adrian, to say that there are greater conduct risk issues, and that perhaps those controls are not in place. They're certainly making progress towards addressing that, but certainly not in place there. You talked, Adrian, about the point in time assessment not being fit for purpose. I would definitely agree on that. Frank, you talked about HR, perhaps the role and the responsibilities of HR. I do think that there's still an issue about MI, isn't there, around conduct MI and about what the board is receiving as a senior manager. And then we talk about robust reporting lines, looking at the 3 lines of defense. You talked about even HR being 4th line of defense. I haven't heard that before, so I'm going to nick that one from you on that. Where do you think, what questions should organizations be asking around their conduct and culture to kind of kick the tires on whether it's fit for purpose in a hybrid working environment?
I think, I mean, you mentioned MI there. It would be, I don't see it very often. It'd be very interesting for firms to do it, to assess outcomes for customers, assess alignment with the conduct risk requirements against the 2 working environments. So if you think about simplistic stuff like giving advice to a customer on pension transfer or something like that, Joe and Jenny in the call center in theory could be in for some days and out for some days. Is there a difference in performance there between the 2? And you've got more complex things that could be looked at as well. So smarter MI that reflects the distinction between the 2.
Definitely smarter MI. I like that point. I'm conscious of time, but I want to move on to this. We talked about 3 lines of defense and the challenges there. Is there a greater burden on the 2nd line, though, as a result of hybrid working? Because they stood up, didn't they, in the last 18 months? Can that continue? And have they been fully staffed to support the hybrid working environment?
I mean, the staffing side is always a challenge for 2nd line functions, because a lot of organizations will think of them as pure cost as opposed to benefit. And that's not necessarily the case. There's challenges internally with the compliance guys actually justifying their role more effectively in organizations, but the cost point is a problem. And realistically, you will need more resource to monitor across hybrid, because your access to people is different. You need to be much more formal in your approach, much more considered in your approach, much more proactive in going out to people. I mean, if we think of 2nd line in its complete sense, you've also got the risk side as well, if firms have got dedicated risk people. And again, they need to do an awful lot more here in terms of quantifying those hybrid risks, having those conversations with the 1st line guys, reporting the hybrid risks up to senior management, flexing the risk register, risk appetite potentially, which has not always happened. So more focus and direction, but certainly potentially more resource as well.
Has the ability of the 1st line to be able to challenge controls or systems, still being adhered to in the 2nd line, in the hybrid working environment? Has that challenge function across the business? That must be more difficult in a hybrid working environment.
Yeah, I mean, do you mean 1st line challenging 2nd line or 2nd line challenging 1st line?
Well, either or, actually.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, and absolutely, the challenge should go both ways. I mean, it is. We've all done it. It's harder to really get into something at a deep level, particularly if it's sort of intangible and nuanced, as much regulation is, if everybody's not in the same room. So that expectation and requirement that, kickoff of new projects, change of direction, new initiative, can we really have that challenge, have that debate, have that open conversation on Zoom, as opposed to let's sit down, let's get the whiteboard out, let's actually work through these issues.
And Adrian, when we talk about compliance monitoring and supervision and controls, is there an appetite for firms to look at technology, to look at raising the game in terms of like their systems and their processes and their controls based upon the risks that we've discussed?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that MI came up. Yeah, because when it gets to people, the MI is often really scant. Yeah, there's very little data. It's all very well, we're going to analyze the data, we're going to quantify these risks. Right, now talk to me about your people competence. This is usually a bum shuffly moment where in reality, yeah, genuine people competence is really tricky to do. So, I mean, we would say this, but a continual assessment model will give you that management information that you can analyze and quantify your risks. So if you are an SM4 looking at risk, and one of those risks is people in a hybrid environment, as per this webinar, yeah, where is your data, hard data, not emotional beliefs? Yeah, where is your hard data about people competence in relation to those the regulations, for example? Where is it in relation to customer fairness or fair outcomes? Yeah, most firms will not have that. And the only way really you're going to do that in an employee acceptable way is in the flow of work, really gentle, continual assessment.
Yeah, and I think you can absolutely do that. I mean, take a differential of call time. If it takes you 10 minutes in the office to have a conversation with a client about something, but it takes you 4 minutes when you're at home, there's a quality, there's a difference there in the amount of information that's been shared.
I've shared on the screen, and thank you very much for participating in this poll. How confident are you that your firm's hybrid working practices, processes and controls meets the FCA's standards there? If I could take a snapshot of that and share the results, love to know your feedback on those results, Frank, that that the audience have shared with us there. Moderately confident. There is the lead answer, and thank you for being honest. 8% of the audience saying no, not at all confident based upon what we've said there. We don't want to put the fear of God in anybody on this webinar. Hopefully we've given them some tips and approaches that they can use there. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I suppose it's your sort of classic bell curve, isn't it? I mean, I would suspect the highly confident maybe not as confident as they should be. Equally, they're not at all confident, maybe are underselling what they're doing, and that sort of middle line of yes, I think some aspects are okay, but I know that there are things that are not working properly, and if I were to have that honest conversation internally about, look, what are these risks? Are we controlling against these risks? Not apportioning blame or anything like that, just being open within the organization about, look, these controls are not working effectively. We need to do something about it, either tighten the controls or we just can't do this via a hybrid model. Then things will improve. But yeah, the sort of, I think most people are in that sort of, yeah, I think it's okay, but really, is it okay? And I probably need to think more about it.
Yeah. I mean, my sense on that, Philip, is that there's room for improvement. And when we were planning this webinar and we had a session last week, I was chatting to Frank, and Frank came up with this point about employment contracts, and it stopped me in my tracks. And I'm like, that's so easy to achieve. It's such a red flag, to regulate. It's one question, yeah. How have your employment contracts changed for these employees that work from home? Well, they haven't. Yeah. So it's such an easy thing. And it left me thinking, okay, I thought I'd really, and we spent a lot of time braining through this working from home and hybrid with a lot of our customers. And it was really stark, Frank, that it says to me, there's a lot more that can be done. It doesn't necessarily have to mean, you're ripping up all the trees and destroying your organization. Not at all. It's just it's some good thought with some professional guidance. In your case, Frank, that's fantastic. But you just think of it in those terms. Are we doing everything we reasonably can? It's that reasonableness test. Yeah. And I think what you're seeing in that poll is a bunch of people saying, perhaps there's more that we can do, which is why it's at the lower end, not the higher end.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, there are smart ways to do this. There's pragmatic ways to do this, which don't impact operations, don't impact commerciality, but just give you that greater degree of confidence.
Yes. We want to make sure that we answer your questions. I noticed that there are some questions in the chat now, Frank and Adrian, if you could just scroll down on the chat there, whilst the audience, we've given you a number of options that you can choose from, which includes obviously receiving our blogs and our papers and our thought leadership on hybrid and remote working, both from Hogan's as well as Elephants. Don't forget, there's the opportunity to reach out to Frank and discuss the possibilities of reviewing and improving, obviously, firms' approach to systems controls around hybrid working, and also looking at how Elephants Don't Forget, through their AI-powered learning tool, can support the hybrid working, staff to improve their levels of competence and confidence around the key issues and the key risks that are impacting your firm and there. Frank, do you want to pick up, or Adrian, do you want to pick up any questions that you've seen there, or comments that you've seen?
I think it was actually a comment from Adrian there about lead and lag indicators is incredibly important, and we go back to that sort of foreseeable harm point around fixing things when they broke is not when they're broken is not really going to be the way forward. Having that feel of things may not be going in the right direction, we need to control these, we need to have a course adjustment, is realistically going to be the way of the world going forward. So that mix of QA monitoring, that's fine, but proactively, what do we think is going to go wrong? How do we make sure it doesn't?
Yes. Final thoughts from yourself there, Frank and Adrian. So we're talking about recalibration of risk, rethinking the controls around those risks, updating risk assessments there to reflect perhaps a risk exposure. We talked obviously before about the risk appetite, in line with the risk appetite of the organization. Do you want to unpack that as a final thought, Frank?
Yeah, and I think, you know, Helen's just sort of answered a question or asked a question around that sort of thing. What do you need to do? And it is, in my view, having that honest assessment of risk, or that honest articulation internally about what potentially can go wrong. Is it acceptable to us? And if you're thinking about risk appetite, we get into, there was one of the slides mentioned it, the sort of operational resilience side of things as well. When we were all in the same building, there were some particular aspects of operational resilience and business continuity that need to be considered. But as we have this dispersed workspace, it is a different order of consideration, and firms are not always reflecting that in business impact assessments, and also in the operational resilience side of things if they're caught by that regulation. So it comes back to your point about risk appetite. There will be things that are acceptable, and back to Adrian's point about people like, you know, some of the trading staff. Potentially, it is never going to be possible for some people to work in a hybrid environment.
We all value feedback. We all like feedback as well, and so we want to make these webinars as practical and as relevant to your day-to-day job. Lots of people from compliance and risk management here, so we want to make that. So your feedback on that last poll question is really welcome, and there we've got broad enough shoulders to adopt any of your feedback on that. So we welcome that. Final thoughts from you, Adrian. I guess that, you know, managing the unknown is difficult in a hybrid environment, or difficult in a working environment from a head office, but managing the unknown can be absolutely mitigated by improving your technology, your awareness of technology and awareness of learning. So addressing those risks to make those risks very much known in the hybrid working environment. Are you seeing the shift?
Yes, we are. Yeah, we are. I think that hybrid is a people-based challenge. Yeah, so strip everything back. It's a people-based issue. So if you put people at the middle of the radar, i.e. your employees, yeah, put your employees at the middle of the radar, and then say, show me the data relating to this issue, our people, and in most instances, the data is really, really poor. So that's the starting point of any risk analysis. Show me the data. Yeah, so we would advocate, and we're seeing it. We are very busy. Yeah, firms who understand this recognize that it is often just a void of data, and they want the data so they can start quantifying where those genuine risks are and plug in the gaps, for example, in the first line of defense. So yeah, we're busy. And in fairness, I'm positively surprised at how many firms are proactively seeking ways to solve the problem. They're already there. They've identified this is people. It's a people-based issue. But I do like, Frank, your fourth line of defense HR, and I will take that as well.
Thank you so much indeed. As we before before Frank registers that as his IP and we shamelessly steal that. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Frank and Adrian, on this webinar. Thank you very much for being participative in this webinar as well. We do appreciate that. We will send out the feedback from the poll results there to validate that you're not the only organisation that has challenges trying to address some of these issues as well as the PDF version of the slides there. I'm glad that it's actually resonated with you, with the majority of you on this. It's all about data, it's all about evidence, it's all about MI indeed. Thank you very much for your time and have a good afternoon.
Thanks a lot, sir.